4 months until the general election, and already Arizona's ballot is bulging.
Right now, there were 7 that came directly from the legislature that were referred to and were already on the ballot. As well, 2 more have been added by voters. Assuming that those counts come through from the Secretary of State's office, those will be on the ballot as well.
Would-be voters are advised to start studying now.
They need to make sure that they understand how to vote before they ever get in that booth or even get the ballot at home.
Tonight on Arizona Week, getting ready for your election decisions.
Production of Arizona Week is made possible in parts by a grant from the Stonewall Foundation and by the members of Arizona Public Media. Thank you for your continued support. Once again, your moderator, Michael Chiha.
The political campaign is upon us, and while most candidates are working to win in the August 28th primary, others are laboring to change state law at the ballot box come November. The legislature has proposed a slew of constitutional amendments, and 2 or possibly 3 citizens' initiatives also could make the ballot. Here are Arizona Public Media political correspondent Andrea Kelly and reporter-intern Paul Ingram to tell us about it. Paul, give us a rundown on the number of constitutional amendment proposals that are on the ballot.
Right now, there were 7 that came directly from the legislature that were referred to and were already on the ballot. As well, 2 more have been added by voters. Assuming that those counts come through from the Secretary of State's office, those will be on the ballot as well.
And Andrea, we won't know for a while if those 2 or possibly 3 initiatives will make the ballot. What's the process there?
Well, first, the Secretary of State's office has 20 days to do a random check of 5% of the signatures or 5% of the petitions turned in. What the Secretary of State's office does is it goes through, in many cases, these are hundreds of thousands of signatures, so it's tens of thousands of pages of petitions. And they check 5% of those to make sure they've been notarized, make sure they have the correct wording, things like that, to make sure those are all in line. And then they forward those 5% signatures to the county recorder's offices. Each county recorder then goes through line by line and verifies those signatures from their county. They have 15 days additionally to do that. So it could be late August before we know which ones have qualified.
And on each of these, there were more than 259,000 signatures required, but they all collected quite a bit more than that, correct?
That's right. Everybody tends to collect, whether it's for a candidate or initiatives like this, extra signatures, because inevitably there'll be some people who signed who didn't live in the right place, weren't registered to vote, things like that. So they always want a buffer.
And Paul, back to the constitutional amendment proposals, 9 proposed constitutional amendments. Is that quite a few for us?
No, I mean, on average, you see about 7 constitutional amendments proposed. Some years you'll see quite a few more. For instance, in 1992, there were 13 that were proposed. 8 of them passed.
8 passed in 92.
Mm-hmm.
And where is Arizona as far as amending its constitution?
Arizona has a constitution that is easily to amend, so it's one of several states that is able to do that. But it has amended its constitution 144 times in 100 years, which actually turns out to be quite a bit.
Quite a bit. And how many of those were citizens' initiatives?
About 112.
112 citizens' initiatives, so the rest, about 30 or so, referred by the legislature.
Correct.
Now, just for some perspective there, the U.S. Constitution, more than 200 years old, has 27 amendments, 26 of them active, because one canceled out another, prohibition, and the repeal of it. So, Andrea, among the constitutional amendments is one that asserts state sovereignty, and there also is an initiative that does that as well. So there actually are 2 proposed amendments that would do that. What's that all about?
Well, there are 2 slightly different wording. The one referred by the legislature will be called Prop 120, and it's a state sovereignty amendment, as you said, that would say that the state has sovereignty over its air, water, natural resources, minerals, land, basically anything except for Indian reservations and federal land. And then the one that was referred by voters, that voters will consider, is called, the name of it is Checks and Balances in Government, and that one would allow the state to quote-unquote reject federal decisions. So basically would give the state the ability to say this part of federal law is okay, this part we don't agree with, which then has its own complications, potentially.
So this is taking that state sovereignty versus federal sovereignty battle that's been going on for a while to another level, taking it into the state constitution. And we've seen a lot of action on that just recently with the U.S. Supreme Court rulings, largely upholding the federal sovereignty both in immigration and in health care. But here we see another tactic by the state, right?
That's right. So there's a question of whether this would be challenged in court by the federal government or an entity of the federal government, say one department. But you're right, exactly. In SB 1070, when that went to the Supreme Court, one really critical part of the decision that the justices made was that state law cannot supersede federal law, and something that is a federal responsibility the states can't take over, but they also can't piecemeal pick which pieces of federal law they follow. So that would likely go to court.
And then, Paul, one of those other proposed constitutional amendments would change the way judges are selected in Maricopa and Pima counties. Tell us about that.
Yeah, essentially what it does is it puts more power in the governor to select judges. It takes away some of the power that the state bar had, rather than them sending selections to the governor for approval and then eventually approval through the voters. Instead, it creates one single position for the state bar. It also changes the retirement age, so judges can be as old as 75 before they're retired, and it also changes their term from 6 to 8 years.
And this isn't the first time that the voters have been asked to amend the Constitution to change the way judges are selected. Is that right?
Correct. They've done it about 6 or 7 times that have passed, and they've been asked to do it more times than that.
So more changes in the offing if this passes.
Correct.
And Andrea, catch us up on what's happening with the one proposal that was filed as just a citizen's initiative, not a constitutional amendment, and that is that would make permanent the 1-cent education sales tax.
That's right. Remember back in 2010, voters statewide approved a 1-cent sales tax to help shore up the state budget to make it through the tough budget years. That is set to expire in 2013, about a year from now, and the backers of this initiative would like to see that extended permanently and used to fund education primarily. It's called the Quality Education and Jobs Act. The name being, if you boost education, then you'll also have better employment opportunities with a better educated workforce. That one is hung up a little bit in court, though, already at this point. This was the first initiative turned in, the signatures turned in, but the Secretary of State's office said the pieces of paper that people actually signed their names on, what the wording of the initiative at the top of that piece of paper did not match what was turned into the office when this group applied for this initiative. So they're saying paperwork, the two wording don't match up. The backers of the initiative say they've filed the correct paperwork. So anyway, all of this will go to court July 18th. There's a hearing set for that. Now, the Secretary of State's office told me that even though there is a court hearing and we don't know what a judge will decide, whether this will go to a ballot or not, the Secretary of State's office is moving forward on verifying those petitions, as I discussed earlier. That way, if a judge says, yes, this should be on the ballot, they don't have to start that 20-day window so much later in the year.
And would we expect the fight over this to continue regardless of what is ruled at the Superior Court level? Do you think it'll get all the way to the state Supreme Court?
I think it could, given that it's a ballot initiative and this is something that people want the voters to decide. At the same time, there's a lot of opposition. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see a continued fight.
Now, who's going to rally around this? The supporters of it have said they have 60-70% support in the polls they've done in the state.
That's right. There are obviously people who support this specific kind of education funding, and a lot of those people are who turned out to vote for the 1-cent sales tax the first time around in 2010 when that was a special election. We have seen other people opposed to it, some of them state legislators who do not want their hands tied on where certain money can go. They'd like to be able to set spending levels as they need to, depending on revenue, and not have specific funding sources for specific things.
And perhaps a key to the whole fight over this, should it make the ballot, is where Governor Jan Brewer comes down, because in 2010 she championed the 1-cent sales tax, but has promised that it will expire next year as scheduled, right?
That's right. And I mean, so far she hasn't said she's against voters making a decision, but she's also not backing that extension. So we'll see where that goes.
Paul, is there anything on the ballot that's pro forma, just something that needs to be passed because it's a fix in the law or the Constitution? Or are there contentious issues throughout all the propositions that we see?
There's really both. I mean, for instance, in pro forma, there's a law that's going to change how funding from the state land trust is going to be done. Right now, there's a fairly complicated formula that's done. Instead, the formula would be changed to being 2.5% of the last 5 years. So that would even out funding for K through 12 schools. It could end up being less money or more money. It's hard to say, but it would simplify the measure, and it would also mean that, for instance, in 2010, schools really didn't get any money from that trust, so that would fix that particular problem. On the other hand, you have things like the Open Government Act, which is very contentious, sales tax acts, and also you have things like the state sovereignty one. That's going to be one that's going to be pushed against by environmental groups because it allows the state to regulate how those things are done, and it's likely that groups like the Sierra Club would be against it.
And Andrea, we're getting down toward the end of our discussion, but let's talk a little bit about what is not going to be on the ballot. There were quite a number of measures that were being circulated out there, but some of them didn't make it. Give us a look at some of those.
Well, you're right. There were quite a number. There was almost 24 people or groups submitted wanting to get on the ballot. Only, as we know, 3 initiatives turned in. But we do see a trend here following some of what we saw in the last couple of legislative sessions with either politicians who wanted to use legislative immunity to get out of criminal charges or ethical violations. So there's 3 that were turned in. None of these made it to the ballot. One was called People for Ethical Government, one called Honest Officials Act, and one called No Criminal Exemptions Act. And basically all of these say our state and local lawmakers should follow the same laws as everybody else. But again, these did not gather enough signatures or turn in enough signatures to make it to the ballots.
So a proposal that says basically that politicians should be honest, that elected officials should be honest. It didn't make the ballot, though. Wouldn't we assume they're honest to begin with?
Well, I'm not going to assume what anybody else is going to assume. We might think different things, but yes, somebody said politicians should be held accountable for what they say in public and not be either recklessly or negligently saying untrue things.
Andrea Kelly, political correspondent for Arizona Public Media. Paul Ingram, reporter, intern, and graduate student in the School of Journalism at the University of Arizona. Thanks so much for being here to brief us on the upcoming ballot initiatives. How do responsible citizens prepare with such complex issues coming up? There are many sources, including a long-established group with the singular goal of voter education. Marion Pickens, former state legislator and second vice president of the League of Women Voters of Greater Tucson, thanks for being with me.
Oh, you're quite welcome.
Now,
Appreciate being here.
The League is very involved in voter education work, and coming into a very busy election year, what does that look like for the League?
It's probably one of our busier times. We've been involved in voter registration up till now, but now that the ballot is actually beginning to take shape with candidates who are running for office and ballot initiatives, which people have to vote for, we want to make sure that participation of registered voters is on a high level, and we try everything to get help people be educated on what's on the ballot.
And you print a voter guide that's distributed statewide, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And where do you get the funding for that?
We have to raise it ourselves. We had a significant fundraiser this last fall, and it was for the purpose of printing this and distributing the voter guide, and it's going to be in English as well as Spanish this time.
The voter guide is your main vehicle then for educating voters. What other things do you do? Do you get involved in any candidate forums?
Yes, we have in the past helped people and organizations who want to put on a forum of candidates. We help them in any way that we can. We let them do the organizing and getting publicity out for the forum, but in the actual setting up the forum and running the meeting, we help them if they ask us to.
Now, the work that the League does is already underway, of course. Is it too soon for voters to begin paying attention to the issues? It's going to be a busy season, so they need to tune in now, right?
Well, I would hope so. With quite a few ballot initiatives, depending on what is passing by the court, that will be on the ballot, they need to make sure that they understand how to vote before they ever get in that booth or even get the ballot at home. We try to take the initiatives and put them into language that people can read and understand, rather than all the legalese that comes. And we're hoping that they can understand the issue itself and the pros and the cons. We try to make sure that it's as objective a writing of our ballot information in the voter guide, so that people can see that some are for it and some are against it, and they can make up their own mind.
And that information will be in the League of Women Voters Guide, is that correct?
Yes, that is our voter guide.
And now the League, you told me, will actually take a stand on a couple or three propositions this year, assuming they make the ballot. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yes, there are three issues that are going to be on the ballot, at least we hope, with one that's still in the courts deciding whether or not it's going to be accepted by the Secretary of State. The one on judges, the selection of judges, we have a position from our past studies on the merit selection of judges, and this initiative goes against what we have stood in the past, and so therefore we're opposed to that initiative on the ballot. Also, the open primary. We believe that people need to be more involved in voting, not less involved, and we are afraid that that's going to cut out some of the people's rights on voting for candidates through that open primary. And in education, we've always believed in the importance of quality education in our public schools, and so we support that too.
And that's the 1 cent sales tax initiative that, as you mentioned, is in court right now.
Yes.
Now, because the League is taking a stand on those issues, can voters count on objectivity in the voter guide when it comes to describing those?
Oh, yes. We are very careful to make sure that there's great objectivity in the voter guide. We also have a group of volunteers who are willing to go out and talk to organizations and groups about the ballot. We take a very careful, nonpartisan position on all of those ballot issues when we talk about them. If people ask if the League has a position on any of them, we could tell them, but that's not part of the presentation.
Now, because you're involved in voter education, I want to have a little fun here and quote Winston Churchill to you and get your reaction. Churchill said, quote, "The best argument against democracy is a 5-minute conversation with the average voter." Do you agree with that?
Unfortunately, yes. There were many times when I was in the legislature and I would introduce myself to even my neighbors that I'm representing them in the legislature, and they had no idea who I was. So the ability for people to recognize candidates or legislators or issues, it takes a real effort on the part of people. And that's, of course, what we're trying to do in the League, is making sure that the knowledge of what is going to be on the ballot, it becomes part of their dialogue and information.
Now, do you find that people these days are making decisions on whom they're going to vote for or the issues that they're going to support or oppose based on ideology, or are they taking a good look at the facts?
Oh, probably both. I hope that they do both. Yes, we all have some ideology in our background on looking at what candidates stand for, but I would hope that they also find out, especially if it's an incumbent, what they have voted for, if they vote for positions or issues that people are in favor of, that would be a good person to reelect. If not, maybe there's somebody else they ought to consider.
Marion Pickens, former state legislator and an officer with the League of Women Voters of Greater Tucson, thanks for speaking with me today.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. The League does wonderful work, and I'm glad to be able to talk about it.
Thanks. Here at Arizona Week, we know that our viewers are all above average voters. To help keep you that way, let's take a closer look at one proposed ballot measure, the one with the potential to cause the greatest change in Arizona politics. That's the Open Government Act. And here to tell us about it is Ted Hinderaker, a Tucson lawyer and member of the sponsoring Open Government Committee. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael.
Tell us, what would the Open Government Act do?
It would change the primary system in Arizona. It would replace, it's a constitutional amendment that would replace the current partisan primary system with an open primary system. So every voter could vote in and every candidate could run in the same primary election. And the top 2 vote getters from that election would move on to the general election.
So in the primary, there would not be party designations?
There could be party designation. The initiative does not prevent a voter or a candidate from identifying themselves with a particular party, nor does it prevent the party from endorsing a particular candidate.
Now, what's the political rationale for doing this, making this fundamental of a change in our system?
Well, the rationale is voters are fed up with the hyperpartisanship, both in Washington and in Phoenix. We did some polling at the beginning of this process and found that the number one thing that voters were upset about with the political process is that their elected officials were not able to work together. 93% said they wanted their elected officials to be able to work together. 79% said that they were concerned about extremism that had crept into the process. And the reason that occurs presently is because you're nominated and you're sent to the general election in a partisan primary where only about 10%, 7 to 10% of the total voters vote. So you have a third independents, a third Democrats, a third Republicans, and if you have 30% or 25% of those voting in the primary, you do the math, it's 7 to 10%. So that 7 to 10% of the voters are going to elect the candidates coming out of the primaries. Now, you combine that with an uncompetitive system. So you have 26 of 30 legislative districts that are non-competitive, which means that if it's an R district, the R is going to win. If it's a D district, the D is going to win. So in essence, you have 7 to 10% of the voters selecting almost 90, 92% of the elected officials. And that's the problem we're attempting to address.
Now, you mentioned that independent voters make up about a third of Arizona registered voters, and that happens to be true, of course. It's about 1 million people. But don't they lean one way or another generally? They vote either Republican or Democratic. Is that not correct?
Well, they can. I haven't done research on that. I'm not sure. But we do know that they don't tend to vote in the primaries. They're allowed to. Independent voters are allowed to select a primary to vote in, but they tend not to do that. And so what currently occurs is the candidates pitch their message to the extreme edge of the party. So if it's Republican, it's going to be a very right-wing message. If it's Democratic primary, it's going to be a very left-wing message. And it's the voters in the middle that are largely ignored.
Now, we've heard of instances elsewhere where they have open primary or nonpartisan elections of candidates who start gaming the system. They might register with a different party so that they can show an affiliation that's really not what they are to try to stack the ballot. Is there a chance that would happen here?
Well, I suppose the flippant answer is as long as you're going to have politics, you're going to have games. And there could be games with this system. But I would submit, and the committee would submit, that it's more likely that gamesmanship would occur under the present system than our system. And the reason is that currently the number of signatures a candidate needs to get on the ballot is a function of what party's primary they're running in. So if you're a Green candidate, you might need 35 signatures. If you're a Republican, you might need 5,000. If you're a Democrat, you might need 4,500. If you're an independent, you might need 12 or 15,000 signatures. So it's very easy to put these minor party candidates on the ballot as stalking horses. And indeed, that's exactly what happened in the Russell Pierce recall election, which incidentally was effectively an open primary. There were a number of Green Party candidates that were put on the ballot in an attempt to deflect votes away from his main opposition, who was another Republican, Jerry Lewis.
Now, you have a party affiliation, you told me before we came on camera. You're registered as a...
I'm a registered Republican. I have always been a registered Republican.
And so what attracted you to this campaign as a Republican?
What attracted me to the campaign was that it was foundational. It offered potentially a foundational solution to so many of the problems we have. Although I'm a Republican, I often don't recognize my party as reflecting my views, and I often don't feel like I have a choice among candidates. I'm limited to extreme candidates on one side or the other, and I want a candidate that's going to work constructively to solve the problems. To me, it's more important that the candidates reflect good ideas and that the voters elect candidates based on ideas and not based on the political party that they're aligned with.
Now, Democrats and Republicans both hold powerful office in Arizona. Republicans happen to be in control at the moment. Do you expect opposition from them, strong opposition to this?
I would say yes. I think the opposition could come both from the Republicans and the Democrats. In fact, the Yellow Report that we were discussing before the show indicates that there's very likely to be a special session on Monday called by the governor. And the likely result of that could be that there's another ballot measure that's put on the November ballot to confuse the voters.
Now, you said that a number of business leaders are involved in this, behind this campaign, contributing money to it and providing other support as well. Business leaders tend to generally be Republicans. And you're Republican. Is this a Republican move?
No, our group is a very broad spectrum group. There are almost equal numbers of Republicans and Democrats and independents, and some minor political parties are also involved. So in perhaps the easiest way to allay some fears is to talk about some of the people that are involved here. The Southern Arizona Leadership Council obviously has endorsed us. The Hispanic Chamber of Commerce has endorsed us. John Schaefer and Helen Schaefer are supporters. Buck O'Reilly is a supporter. Bruce Beach is a supporter. Lisa Lavallo. There are a number of Tucson business leaders that are known for their moderate positions and their intelligence on political issues that are supporting this proposal. Incidentally, Richard Carmona at a recent event, I think to the chagrin perhaps of his handlers, said that this sounded like a great idea.
And there are also a number of people from Phoenix who support it. Is that not so?
Oh, there are. Yeah, the Greater Phoenix Leadership Council is one of the biggest sponsors. A number of the Chamber of Commerce's. Phil Francis is a supporter. Bill Post is a supporter. There are a lot of very influential and very motivated people in both Tucson and Phoenix that are supporting this initiative.
And our viewers can go to our website to see who those folks are. We'll put their names on there and their affiliations. Ted Hinderaker, a member of the Open Government Committee, thanks so much for coming in and speaking with me.
You bet. Thank you very much, Michael.
You can find much more information on all the ballot measures and the overall election campaign at Arizona Public Media's Your Vote 2012 Election Center at azpm.org. That's our program for Friday, July 6, 2012. Next week, we'll strive to introduce you to the new president of the University of Arizona, Ann Weaver Hart. For Arizona Week, I'm Michael Chihak.
Production of Arizona Week is made possible in parts by a grant from the Stonewall Foundation and by the members of Arizona Public Media. Thank you for your continued support.